Today's story isn't just about a graduation. It's about honor, humiliation, and an unforgettable moment of silent rebellion. When a proud black Marine showed up to witness his son's biggest day, he never expected to be treated like an outsider. But just when things turned ugly, a powerful silence swept the room. And what happened next made history in that auditorium. The auditorium was buzzing with excitement. Families were seated, cameras ready, and the smell of fresh flowers filled the air. Today was graduation, a milestone moment. Among the crowd was Sergeant Marcus James, a retired Marine who had served his country for over 2 decades. Dressed sharply in a suit, he sat quietly in the second row, pride gleaming in his eyes. His son, David, was set to graduate with honors. But just as the ceremony was about to begin, 2 security guards approached Mark. One of the guards leaned down and spoke in a low voice, "Sir, we need you to step outside for a moment." Marcus looked up, confused. "Why?" he asked calmly. The second guard replied, "There's been a complaint. Someone said you're not supposed to be sitting here." A few heads in nearby rows turned. Marcus kept his composure, but inside, his heart sank. He showed his invitation and ID, but the guards weren't backing down. This wasn't a mistake. This was something else. He had come to see his son. David, standing backstage, had no idea what was happening. He was minutes away from hearing his name called. Meanwhile, Marcus stood up slowly, not wanting to make a scene. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, "I just want to see my son graduate." But the guards insisted he come outside. Murmurs spread. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "Isn't that the Marine who spoke at the school assembly last year?" Another man stood up and said, "He's not doing anything wrong." But the guards kept pre. Just as Marcus began walking toward the aisle, something shifted. From the back of the auditorium, 6 men stood up, quiet, steady, and unmistakable. Navy SEALs. Each of them in civilian clothes, but carrying themselves like warriors. One of them called out, "He's with us." The entire room fell into silence. The guards paused mid-step, unsure of what to do. The SEALs began walking down the aisle toward Marcus, calm, confident, not threatening, but unmistakably powerful. It was clear something. One of the SEALs reached Marcus first and shook his hand. "Sir," he said with respect, "you don't move unless you choose to." The others surrounded him, not to protect, but to stand with him. The lead SEAL turned to the guards, "This man is a decorated Marine. He's earned his seat more than anyone here." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. The principal, now aware of the disturbance, approached from the stage. The audience watched in silence. Some began recording. Everyone knew, this was n. The principal looked from the guards to Marcus and then to the SEALs. He cleared his throat nervously and said, "Sir, I sincerely apologize. Please, stay seated. You're welcome here." One of the guards muttered, "We were just following orders." But no one was listening to them anymore. Marcus nodded respectfully to the SEALs and quietly returned to his seat. The 6 men didn't return to theirs, they stood at the sides, arms crossed, scanning the room. It was no longer just a graduation, it was. David finally stepped onto the stage, unaware of what had just unfolded. The crowd clapped, but many eyes were still on Marcus. David's name echoed through the hall, David Marcus James, honors graduate. As he walked across the stage, he spotted his father in the crowd. Their eyes met. David noticed the 6 men standing nearby, the tension in the air, and his father's straightened shoulders. Something had happened, he could feel it. But instead of fear, David felt pride. His father hadn't Jew. After the ceremony, students and families began to gather outside for pictures. Marcus remained seated for a moment longer, collecting himself. The SEALs didn't leave his side. One of them said quietly, "This should have never happened, brother. But we weren't about to let it slide." Marcus nodded with gratitude. Years ago, he had served alongside one of these men, and when that man saw what was happening today, he alerted the others. "We don't let our own stand alone," he said. It was more than. Outside, David found his father and ran to hug him tightly. "What happened, Dad?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Long story, son. But I'm right where I should be." David looked at the seals, then back at his father. "You didn't let them move you?" Marcus shook his head. "No. And I didn't have to. They made sure of that." David had always known his father was strong, but today, he saw something deeper, the strength of dignity, and the kind of respect that doesn't come from medals, but from standing tea. Word of the incident began to spread online. Someone had posted a clip of the SEALs rising from their seats and confronting the guards. Within hours, it was being shared with hashtags like #HonorTheVeteran and #HeEarnedHisSeat. Comment sections filled with praise. "This is what brotherhood looks like, disgraceful treatment of a hero, those SEALs are the real MVPs." People didn't just see a confrontation, they saw a statement. About race. About respect. About how even those who serve this see. The school district released a brief statement the next morning, calling the incident a misunderstanding. But it didn't sit well with many. Local news outlets picked up the story, and veterans groups began demanding answers. A petition was started to have Marcus James formally honored by the school. Within 48 hours, it had over 50,000 signatures. Parents who were at the ceremony called in to support him. "My child's graduation meant more because of what that man endured, and how others stood." Marcus didn't ask for attention. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. When interviewed by a local journalist, he simply said, "I came to see my son walk across that stage. That's all that mattered." But the calm in his voice only made his story hit harder. Viewers saw a man who had given his life to serving his country, yet still had to prove he belonged. And that was the part that hurt the most. For many veterans watching, it was a reflection of something they knew too well: respect isn't always. David, overwhelmed by the love pouring in online, wrote a heartfelt post, "My father is my hero, not just for his service, but for how he stayed calm and dignified when it would have been easier to shout." And to the men who stood with him. "You didn't just back him up, you backed up every father who's ever felt disrespected for simply showing up." His post went viral. Thousands of likes, shares, and comments poured in. People were tagging schools, media outlets, even lawmakers. The story wasn't G. The 6 Navy SEALs remained silent publicly, declining interviews. But privately, one of them told Marcus something that stuck with him: "We've seen war. We've seen loss. But nothing hits harder than watching a brother be disrespected back home." Those words echoed in Marcus's mind for days. He didn't want fame or interviews, but he wanted this moment to mean something. He met with local veterans groups and asked them to advocate for better training for school staff, so this wouldn't happen. As the school board scrambled for damage control, an unexpected thing happened: students began organizing. Seniors who had just graduated started posting selfies with Marcus at the ceremony, tagging them, #HeBelongs, #OurMarine, #GraduationHero. They flooded the school's official page with messages demanding an apology. "We don't want our graduation remembered for speeches or certificates," one wrote. "We want it remembered for how one father stood tall, and how 6 warriors reminded us what we." Finally, the school board held a public meeting. Cameras were everywhere. Marcus was invited to speak. He stepped up to the podium in his same quiet, composed way. "I don't want anyone fired," he began. "But I do want things to change. Because next time, it might be someone who doesn't have 6 SEALs in the room." His words were met with a standing ovation. He walked off stage without another word, but he didn't need to say more. His silence had already spoken volumes. And for once, the room was. The next morning, national news picked up the story. Headlines read, "Marine disrespected at graduation, respected by SEALs." Interviews from audience members played on screen, some in tears recalling how powerful it was to see those men stand up. One elderly woman said, "I've lived a long life, but I've never seen a moment like that." Social media turned Marcus into a symbol, not of victimhood, but of strength with grace. His image, standing tall among the SEALs, became an icon. Not just of a. Offers started flooding in, podcasts, TV shows, even documentary pitches. But Marcus declined most. "This isn't entertainment," he said. "This is real life. And if we're not careful, we'll turn pain into performance." What he did agree to was something different, a town hall meeting with veterans, educators, and students. He wanted dialogue, not drama. That night, the auditorium was full again. But this time, no one was silenced. Voices were heard, stories were shared, and healing began. It was. David sat beside his father during the town hall. At one point, a young student asked, "Weren't you angry?" Marcus paused. Then answered, "Of course I was. But anger's easy. Dignity takes work." The room nodded in agreement. David smiled, proud beyond words. He'd always looked up to his dad. But now, so did an entire community. Later that evening, David told him, "You taught me what strength really means today. Not on a battlefield, but in a school auditorium." And Marcus replied, "Son, that was." The school eventually made things official. They invited Marcus to speak at next year's graduation as guest of honor. He accepted, but only if they included a panel on diversity and respect as part of the ceremony. "A speech isn't enough," he said, "we need action in policy too." The principal agreed. And so, the event was renamed, the Honor Walk. A new tradition was born, where every graduate shakes hands with veterans, educators, and community leaders before receiving their diploma. A moment. 1 year later, Marcus stood on that same stage, but this time, not in the crowd, not under pressure. He wore his medals, but didn't talk about war. Instead, he spoke about peace. About moments that test your patience more than battlefields test your body. About quiet dignity. About the day 6 men stood up, not to fight, but to protect what was right. The crowd stood before he even finished. The school had changed. The community had grown. And the son who once watched from the stage now watched. After the ceremony, people lined up, not for photos with the principal or the banner, but to shake Marcus's hand. Students, teachers, even some of the same guards from last year came forward. One of them looked him in the eye and said, "I didn't know better back then. I do now. Thank you for not making me the enemy." Marcus simply nodded. He didn't offer forgiveness. He didn't need to. Growth had already begun. And that was enough. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes, it walks quietly into. A reporter asked Marcus later, "Do you think the world really changes from moments like this?" He smiled and replied, "Change doesn't come from moments. It comes from what we do after those moments." He didn't want to be remembered for going viral or standing in defiance. He wanted people to remember the power of calm strength. The kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind that builds bridges, not battles. He knew not everyone would remember his name, but they'd remember what he stood for. And back at home, Marcus and David sat on the porch as the sun set. No cameras, no claps. Just a father and son in peace. David looked at his dad and said, "You know, I think your greatest service wasn't in uniform." Marcus raised a brow. "Oh yeah?" David nodded. It was in that room, when you stayed calm and let the world see who you really are. Marcus didn't respond right away. Just smiled, leaned back in his chair, and let the silence speak. After all, that's how this whole story began, with S.I. A few weeks later, Marcus received a letter from a young student who had been at the original graduation. She wrote, "That day, I saw something I didn't learn in any classroom. I saw what it means to stand for someone. I want to be like those SEALs someday, not just in uniform, but in courage." The letter moved Marcus deeply. It reminded him that even quiet moments can echo loudly in someone else's life. And maybe that was the point all along, not to fight the whole system at once, but to chon. That year, a mural was painted on the side of the school building. It showed a silhouette of a Marine standing among 6 others, facing forward with quiet resolve. Above it, the words, "Honor is not given. It is recognized." The artist had been a student at the original graduation. She said, "This isn't about one man. It's about reminding every student who walks past this wall, you belong. And no one has the right to tell you otherwise." Marcus stood in front of it one day, hand on his heart, and months passed, but the impact of that one graduation day stayed alive. Schools across the state started adopting similar honor walk traditions. Teachers received sensitivity training. Veterans were invited into classrooms to share stories, not about war, but about values, resilience, courage, and calm strength. Marcus, without ever planning to, had become a quiet ambassador for change. He didn't campaign, didn't boast. He just kept showing up, in rooms that once ignored men like him, now in. David, now in college, called his dad after a tough day. "I had a professor challenge me hard today," he said. "I kept thinking about that day at graduation. How you didn't lose your cool." Marcus chuckled. "Did you stand your ground?" David replied, "I did. Not loud, not angry. Just solid." Marcus smiled. "That's all it takes, son. The loudest man in the room is usually the weakest." That lesson, more than any classroom or military training, was what Marcus had passed on. Strength doesn't alwa. Marcus never chased justice through noise, he simply lived it. And in doing so, he reminded an entire community what true power looks like. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that earns it. His journey became a quiet blueprint: when disrespected, rise without rage. When unseen, stand without bitterness. When supported, walk forward with others. People started referring to him not by rank, but by legacy, the man who turned silence into strength. And honestly, Marcus liked it bet. Years later, at a new graduation, a young black father took a seat in the second row. No guards questioned him. No eyes followed him with suspicion. He sat proudly, watching his daughter walk the stage. And on the program's back cover? A quote from Marcus James: "The moment you show up with love and dignity, the world has no choice but to reckon with both." That man never met Marcus. But he didn't need to. Because sometimes, the loudest legacy is left behind not in monuments, but in changed mom.